I'm John Chowney with Campbellsville University for Dialogue on Public Issues. Welcome back to our continuing series of interviews with candidates in the November 5th general election. We have invited all candidates in the statewide elections, and today I'm very honored and pleased to be interviewing the incumbent Republican State Treasurer, Ms. Allison Ball, and who is a candidate for re-election. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's great to be back.
Tell us again, I think you're pretty well known in our area, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, would be happy to. Well, just background, how I got to where I am. I'm from Floyd County. I'm the 9th generation from Floyd County in Prestonsburg. My family's been there since the 1790s.
Wow.
And I always feel a little bit of a connection to Campbellsville. As you know, my husband is from Campbellsville.
Yes.
So this is like home number 2. And my little boy, who is 13 months old, is actually with his grandparents right now, just down the street.
Oh, okay.
So we are here quite often.
And your husband is?
Asa Swan. And so a number of folks know him in this area because he
Right.
ran for state rep several years ago, and he's been actively involved in a lot of ways. And so he's now in Frankfort with me, and we're fighting the good fight up there.
Well, congratulations on Levi's
Thank you.
birth. We followed that and know you're proud parents.
Thank you.
Now, why did you decide to run for re-election for Kentucky State Treasurer?
Great question. I have loved the job. It's been a tremendous privilege. I just wake up every day just thanking God for the opportunity to do what I get to do. And I'm not done yet. You know, when you do something like this that you care about, you always have a vision for the future. And I'm really pleased with what I've been able to accomplish while I've been in office. We'll get to talk about that, I know. But there are things that I still want to see done, and I'd like to be able to have 4 more years to finish it out.
What is the most satisfying part of being state treasurer?
You know, there's a lot of things that are great about being state treasurer. The core function of the job is being that watchdog on taxpayer dollars, and there's great satisfaction and fulfillment when you know that you're doing the job the way it's supposed to be done. But one thing I'm very, very proud of, just on a personal level, I practiced bankruptcy law before I was treasurer, and through that experience, I really got to care about teaching people financial literacy principles. And that's been something that I have pushed while I've been in office. It's not something that people always think of naturally with the office, but it's a natural fit because all the money in Kentucky and government comes in and out of my office. So I've got a great platform to talk about financial literacy. So last year I pushed to get a bill passed to make it a high school graduation requirement that you've got to have a course or program on financial literacy before you're through with school. And believe it or not, you probably will believe it, that was actually a big effort. Not everybody is excited about the idea, or at least they weren't last year. And I was able to get bipartisan support on it. I had to work it pretty hard, but I was able in the end to really show people this is important. We need to do this in Kentucky. So that was a big step one, and then there's other steps a part of that too. This year I got a Financial Empowerment Commission launched. And it had to be done legislatively because it's kind of a quasi-governmental organization. The Treasury is closely connected to the Commission, but it has its own role, and that is to make sure financial literacy resources are available to schools and other groups that want to teach it. And I'm very proud that we were able to figure out how to do it without using taxpayer dollars. And so this can actually be supported from the private sector, and I've got commitments lined up for the next 3 years for about $1 million from the credit unions across Kentucky. So that's one of the things that I'm very proud of in my role as treasurer.
Well, congratulations on the legislation and the
Thank
commission.
you.
It's almost a no-brainer for me, at least, in thought that any would object to that, because I see so many young people coming out of school that really have no clue as to basics of opening a bank account and managing a bank account and balancing a checkbook and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're not going to know these things intuitively, or at least most people aren't. There are some people, I suppose, have a natural bent for it, but most people have to be taught it. And so that's been something I've been really committed on. And actually, we're getting national attention right now in Kentucky about what's happening on financial literacy. Secretary Mnuchin in D.C. contacted my office a little over a week ago, and they want to do a pilot program here in Kentucky because they've seen what I've been doing in the treasurer's office. So they want to work hand in hand with us on that. And then the CFPB is doing a case study on Kentucky right now, and they're actually going to be doing a meeting housed at the Treasury on August the 27th. So what's kind of fun is that we're actually starting to get people looking at us and saying, hey, we want to do what you're doing too.
Now, you're 4 years older than you were, obviously.
I am, yes.
And still very young, I might add. But you were one of the youngest statewide officials in the nation
I
when you were
was.
elected?
I was one of the youngest, and I was the youngest woman in the whole country for a statewide office for about 3 years. And it's one of those distinctions that you're not going to keep forever. So earlier this year, there's a woman who got elected in Wisconsin who was about 3 months younger than I am. So I lost the title, but I had it for about 3 years. And it's not something that I even knew was going to be a distinction of mine when I ran. I actually didn't find that out until after I'd won office. But I think it's good for Kentucky because it shows that we have people that are young that want to run, and that we are the kind of state that you don't have to wait your turn. But if you've got fresh ideas and you're ready to go and you have a vision, we'll give you a shot in Kentucky.
Do you find that young people are turning their backs on politics and public office, or is there some renewed interest?
That's a good question. I think there's a mix. I do think having young people in office just spurs other people to think, you know what, maybe I can be involved, or they'll start to identify with issues that you're presenting. So I think it really does help when you have young people who are elected officials, just to encourage young people to be involved. There is kind of a weariness, I think, throughout the country because politics has gotten to be more and more divisive. And I am a believer of trying to do things in a kind way, in a courteous way, and I've tried to do that in my role. And hopefully that encourages young people to see, you can do this and do this in a way that's not just mean and hateful.
I think it's fair to say that you have an image of being a positive, very positive conservative office holder and standard bearer for conservative positions in the public domain. What do you say to those who maintain that Republicans and conservatives in general are mean-spirited and negative, and to the general, and then secondarily just to the general image that our political and public domain and public discourse is negative?
Sure.
What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, people can point to people on all sides right now who can be kind of negative, kind of mean-spirited, and I really think that the best way to combat that is not to be mean-spirited, not to be negative, to be positive, to have a vision, and I think people gravitate towards that kind of leadership. I always like the image of Ronald Reagan and how he was known as a great communicator, and he was friendly and he was funny. So I think there's a lot of attraction to being positive, to being friendly. From a Christian perspective, I feel like that it's even more important for me to behave in a way that reflects my faith in a positive way. So,
how did your faith inform your public service?
Well, of course it does in every level. My faith is extremely important to me. I became a Christian when I was very young, and my parents have been involved in ministry my whole life, and of course my husband's family have been involved in ministry my whole life. So it's a core part. It's the main identity of who I am, and absolutely impacts everything I do, because you focus, if you're a believer, if Jesus is important to you, you focus on doing everything with integrity, being honest, doing the right thing, and there's always pressure when you're in office to do something that other people want you to do that maybe you don't feel like is the right thing to do, or just be popular or in some way. And if your faith is that core function of who you are, you're going to evaluate everything in that way. So so I begin my day very prayerfully. I begin and end it in prayer and with my Bible. And I think all those things are really important, just to remind me of what is important, what is true, and you have to behave with integrity.
Now, what are the responsibilities, back to the race and the office?
Yes.
The responsibilities for the viewers who may not be as familiar with the treasurer's office.
Yes.
Some people think of a treasurer as somebody that sits down and writes checks. And obviously it's much more than that. You don't physically write every check for the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Very few checks to actually write. And a lot of people do think that that's what the job is. You just write checks. But that's actually a very, very small portion of what we do. And we're moving away from that because we're doing a lot less with checks. It's just the world is changing, and you just don't need to do that as much anymore. So treasurer, everybody knows it has to do with money, and that's correct. All the money in Kentucky goes in and out of my office. And most things relate to money in some way. So the core function of my job is to be that watchdog on taxpayer dollars. And that means whatever comes out of my office has to be legal, it has to be in line with the Constitution, it has to be correct going out. And there have been occasions where I've actually stopped spending because it hasn't conformed with the law the way it should be. It's not a policy position, it's an executive position. So if I don't like something the General Assembly has said, I don't have the discretion to say, no, I'm not going to spend that money. Right. The General Assembly tells me where it should go, and I make sure it goes there. But part of that too is being top of the line on cybersecurity. I know that your university is really focusing on that right now, and that's something that I have emphasized in my office. And we caught and stopped a $5.3 million fraud attempt on Kentucky earlier or later last year, right before Christmas. And we've gotten national attention on that because we did it in a textbook way, the way it's supposed to be done. So people are looking to us about how do you do this? How do you catch this kind of thing? So that's part of that role, being that watchdog. We got some news this week that we caught an embezzlement attempt that's led to a federal indictment, and those are definitely core functions of being a watchdog. I sit on a bunch of boards. I sit on the KIA board. People get KEYS money in Kentucky to go to school. That's one of the things that I deal with, and 529 plans, because that's financially related. The lottery board has been one of my roles. I usually chair the State Investment Commission, which oversees all of our investments in Kentucky, and that's been an enjoyable position to have. I sit on the Teachers Retirement Board. Only this last year, the Deferred Compensation Board was added because of my work on retirement. I was now put onto that, which has to do with state workers' additional retirement. So, and there's a few other boards. All of them are just financially related. One thing that people love to hear about from my office, and it's part of that watchdog, is I'm in charge of unclaimed property in Kentucky. And it's essentially a statewide lost and found. I've returned record amounts of unclaimed property. That's one of the things that I did when I got in office, is I got it in order. We had a backlog of 3 months, so I got caught up. And I made improvements to that. I updated the law. It hadn't been updated since the 80s. And so we now have to deal with things like Bitcoin and gift cards that weren't a problem back in 1980.
Right.
So I returned over $80 million of unclaimed property. And added to that, and these were things that people weren't focusing on before I got in office. This is not a core function of the job, but it's what I've done, is I focused on transparency. And I launched a transparency website so that way taxpayers can see where their money is going. And I think that's an important thing for my role. As that watchdog, part of it is making sure people see where their money is going. And when I got in office, we were ranked 24th in the nation on transparency. And after I launched that website, we're now in the top 10 on transparency in the whole country.
What level of detail can a taxpayer see?
Good question. Yeah, you could actually go pretty deep, and that's one of the things we wanted to do, is we wanted to be able to drill down to you go as far as you want to go. And one of the things is that I got from the media is they wanted to be able to go in depth. They just don't want surface level, like this block of money goes there. They wanted to see more. So one of the things I wanted to make sure is it was easy to use. And I tell people, you can Google your government. It's very much like Google. And you can go step by step by step and go deeper and deeper.
Can you tell what a particular cabinet member spends on travel, for example, or that kind of detail?
Yes, you can go to pretty deep levels on that. And now, right now, you've got all the executive spending, and then you've got all the judiciary, and then there's some other areas where I want to see improvements. I have to work in partnerships with some others. The legislative branch is its own section, and I have to coax them to come along and give me information to put on there. And long-term goal is to include state governments on this, school boards, so that way what I've been able to do with the executive branch and the judicial branch, people can do for all levels of government.
This may seem like a nonsensical question. It's probably more my curiosity than it is related to the campaign, but do you ever literally sit down and write a check? Or your staff write a check for the Commonwealth of Kentucky,
yes,
and you have to physically sign it?
I have actually done that, yes. And usually there's a particular check that's an emergency check. It's unique, it's different, and we need to do something right away. So yeah, I have actually, people have gotten real signatures from me. They probably don't know it. It looks the same as the printed ones, but yeah, they've actually gotten some real ones from me. And I also sign off on all of our bonds in Kentucky. I'm the final authority on our bonds. So those ones I actually do have to sign, because usually those are in the millions of dollars.
Explain the watchdog function. I remember when you ran 4 years ago, at least in my time doing this show, and you were the first candidate I really ever heard talk about the Treasurer's Office being a watchdog.
Yes.
Explain that a little more in detail, and you've given a couple of good examples of being a watchdog, but how do you view that?
Well,
and how do you go about that?
Yeah, I'm not the first treasurer to have emphasized that role.
Right.
And if you read the Constitution and you look at Kentucky's history, it's pretty clear that was the inherent position of the role. That's the core function of it. But you're right, I have emphasized it a whole lot more than anybody else has. And that distinguishes it from just the checks, just the rubber stamp check, send it out, goes out, it's gone. But I do feel like I'm supposed to make sure whatever comes out of my office is legal, is statutory. And one example of that, there was a man who was on the Kentucky Retirement Systems Board, and he was removed from the board. But before he was through with everything he wanted to do, he used pension dollars to pay for outside counsel to sue to be back on the board. So he was off the board, but he was using those dollars to pay attorneys to sue to get back on the board. And I got the invoice for it. And the invoice I got, I don't think much had happened. I think that he just retained counsel. They probably had reviewed documents because I don't think anything had really gone beyond that. But it was $50,000 from the attorneys. And I like to cite that because I think it's a great example of if you don't have someone who's watching things, you get a lot of money just slip away quickly. So that's a good example of, pension dollars are precious. We know we need to protect those. All taxpayer dollars are precious. So things like that, when you know that there's something that's not right about it, and I looked at the legality of it because I am an attorney by background, and I do think it helps to be an attorney. Practicing bankruptcy law has got that financial component to it, but practicing law trains you to look at the law, and that's what it really means to be that watchdog, is to make sure whatever's coming out is consistent with the law. There's a few other things that we've kept our eyes on and worked on, but that's the most prominent example that people understand.
Your opponent in this election recently made statements at Fancy Farm,
yes,
tying you into certain things about on the pension debate and so forth, and basically, regardless of where the viewers may stand on the ongoing debate, and I think this was particularly in the context of the teacher retirement. How do you respond to his general statements, and are we making progress, in your opinion? You sit on the teachers' retirement.
That's right.
Pension board, as I understand.
Yes, well, and I remember hearing his comments too, and my thought at the time is it sounds like he's running for governor, because those were the comments centered around. But yeah, the pension problem is a serious problem, and unfortunately the answer comes from the General Assembly. I do think that on the board you have a stewardship role, and I've really been committed to making sure that whatever I can do to make sure that it's in good hands, that the investments are strong, that we have the correct idea of what's going to come in as far as your investments, the assumed rate of return. Those are the areas where you have a role on the board. But as far as how do you fix the pension problem, that comes from the General Assembly.
Right.
And I make comments on occasion and telling them, hey guys, we really do need to, and ladies, we need to fix this. We need to make sure we do something about this. This is where it stands. So on that board, I can tell you, this is where we're at. This is what we're looking at. These are areas that need to be fixed, and it's a stewardship role. But the structure of it comes from the General Assembly, and that makes sense, being the executive branch and the legislative branch.
In this campaign, what do you think are the main issues?
Oh, well, I think core has to be that watchdog role. You have to make sure that you have somebody who understands what that means. And it's not a policy position. It's not I don't like what the General Assembly has done here. I don't like the governor signing off here. I'm going to not send this check out. It makes sure that whatever is legal, whatever is constitutional, whatever is correct goes out. And I think financial literacy, we are becoming that leader nationally, and I have visions to do more with that in the future. Right now, the commission that I've launched is mostly focused on schools, but there's several other groups that I also want to focus on: the emerging adults, low-income families, people with disabilities. I launched a program called Stable Kentucky, which is a savings and investment program for people with disabilities, and it works nicely with my emphasis on financial literacy. So I want to grow those things. Right now, Stable Kentucky also has a component to encourage people with disabilities to get into the workforce, and you can actually save more money if you have it come directly from your employer. So I want to grow those things while in my second term. And one of the things I'm really excited about, I've been already building on launching a women's conference on financial literacy next year. So of course I got to get elected to do that.
Right.
But I've taken the steps to launch that. A few other treasurers have been working on some things similar to that, and that's one of the things I want to work on in that next time. So financial literacy is just beginning to take off. This incoming class is going to be the first class that's going to have standards available to it to know what needs to be taught. And there's more that needs to be done on that. Transparency, there's more that needs to be done on that. I've been working the last few years to build relationships with local governments and other organizations to have them included on that. So there's several fun things that I want to get addressed.
Tell us about the size of the Treasurer's office, staff-wise, budget-wise.
Sure.
Do you anticipate needing more money, additional staff during the next 4 years to do more things?
Well, I've been very proud while I've been in office that I've actually cut my budget several times. In fact, I was just trying to calculate how many times I've done it, and there was at least 2 times in my first year, and I've done it multiple times the whole time that I've been in office. And I've done that because I've wanted to set an example of frugality, to do more with less. I think when you have a pension problem, when you have other issues in government, you need to make sure you're using your money the best way. And if I can tighten my belt, then I want to do it, and I've been doing that. So it's a small office. It fluctuates, 3 to 4 million in what it asks. So it's not one of the bigger offices. It may sound like a lot, but when you compare it to other ones, it's actually one of the smallest offices. And we usually have about 30 employees. That also fluctuates a little bit. But yeah, it's one of the smaller offices, but it packs a good punch, I think, from what we do. We balance the books in Kentucky. Of course, we do the checks. We manage our banking relationship with JPMorgan Chase, and we're the point person for the IRS, which has a significant role. When I first got in office, we had about $1 million in fines in Kentucky, and I was able to work with the IRS and get those abated. And all those dollars are precious, and that was $1 million I was able to protect for Kentucky.
But what are you doing with IRS when you say you interact with contact? Is that over maybe not having paid to IRS fees or something that come through the state, or
it's usually payroll.
Okay,
the main function of it is payroll. Yes,
okay.
Yeah, but there's different ways that we interact with IRS, but the core one is the payroll.
Are there other initiatives that you hope to undertake during the next 4 years?
Well,
as State Treasurer?
I do want to do a greater emphasis on retirement for the general public, and that's something that I've begun to work on, and that's one reason why I was put on the Deferred Compensation Board, because that, like I said, goes hand in hand with financial literacy. And I'm a big believer in being smart with your money, saving, taking care of yourself for the future, and not having to be dependent upon the government if you can. So that's one of the things that I've begun working on while I've been in office, and there's several treasurers that are working on that throughout the country, and several of us have been talking about what are some good ways from a government perspective to encourage savings and 401k like programs.
Okay, would it be more of an educational kind of
there's
effort
definitely
to working in the private sector with employers and their employees?
There's definitely an education component because it's part of it, but I do think that some of it is federal. I actually had an op-ed not that long ago from what can be done in the federal level, and then we're looking at what can be done even at a state level. If there's things that you can do legislatively to encourage 401ks, to encourage other types of retirement savings. So it's kind of a beginning thing right now to figure out what can be done from a state level to encourage the right kind of behavior. But that's one of the things that I would like to see more of in the coming years.
Now, this is not a trick question,
okay,
but it's a fair question.
Okay.
You are very capable, very bright, very young, running for your second term. What's next for Allison Ball after your second term as state treasurer if you're elected?
Well, thank you for asking that. I'm a big believer in focusing on one goal at a time right now, and so the goal is, get reelected. There's more that I want to do. There's more I want to do on financial literacy and transparency. I do want to move into the retirement world a little bit more, do that watchdog role the way it's supposed to be done, strengthen the office, and I have ideas too about how to improve unclaimed property to get more money back to people. So that's where my whole focus is right now. I do love serving. It's been a tremendous privilege, and when those 4 years are up, I will be term limited, and I'll just be prayerful and asking God, what do you feel? What do you want me to do, Lord? And what opens up. So there's a few things that I feel like work well with my skill set. A few things I'm looking at, but we'll just pray about it. And
well,
see what
you
happens.
have an open invitation to come back to Dialogue on Public Issues
Thank
and
you.
make those announcements as
Thank
they
you very
come
much.
forth. And on the surplus property, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you: how long does an item stay there before you can sell it and return the money, I assume, to the Commonwealth?
Forever. It stays forever.
Okay.
You never lose your property rights.
Okay.
And there's a move across the country right now to change that, to make it escheat to the state fully at some point. But I'm a big believer in property rights, and I believe that if it belongs to you, it belongs to you. And I don't want the state taking it. I want it to go back to you. So that's one reason why I've been committed to making sure it's returned to people, and I'm gonna continue with that while in my second term.
How do you run a down ballot race for office? Now, you've done it once successfully. You're now in the midst of your second. Most of the media attention and fundraising attention goes to the governor's race, obviously, in an election cycle. So how does a candidate for state treasurer get attention other than coming to Dialogue on Public Issues, of course?
That's right. That's a key part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a must along the way. But what's your strategy? How do you go about putting together a statewide campaign?
You work very, very hard. Mm-hmm. That's probably the number one thing that you do if you're a down ticket candidate. Mm-hmm. You're right. Most of the attention goes to the governor, and then next it goes to the attorney general, and then everybody else. You've got niches of people who pay attention to certain mm-hmm. roles. But you go where you can. You talk to everybody you can. I think I've been very good at going to bipartisan groups and showing that there's things everybody can get excited about what I've done while I've been in office, mm-hmm. And that they can get excited about things that I want to do in the next 4 years. So it really is just a sweat equity, show up everywhere, work hard. And I've got a 1-year-old now, and so baby Levi makes his appearance on the campaign trail.
He was at Fancy Farm, I think.
He was at Fancy Farm, yes.
I remember you referencing him.
Yes, he had
in the crowd.
He had his Vote for My Mom t-shirt on, and the back said "Babies for Ball." So, he's a sweet little boy who loves people, and when he was born, I became the first constitutional officer to have a baby while in office, mm-hmm. which is kind of neat. I think that is good for women to see other women who are running for office and balancing mm-hmm. family and career and doing all those things, because I'm always trying to encourage women to get involved. Do you see more
women taking that chance, stepping out and taking the chance of offering themselves as a candidate for office?
I don't know if we see a lot more, but I'm always trying to encourage women to mm-hmm. do that. And I remember a couple of years ago, I think we had 10 women who approached me and said they were running, and almost all of them said that they had been encouraged by seeing me run, and hopefully they're now encouraging other people to run. Mm-hmm. So I think part of just inspiring women to run is seeing other women run, but I'm a big believer in we need more women at the table, and I want young women too, not just women who've retired and have raised a family. I think there's a place for all of us at different roles in life.
There would be those that would say the Republican Party is not as friendly to women as the Democratic Party. What say you to that?
Well, I like to point to being the first statewide elected official in Kentucky who's had a baby while in office, and I think that's a great example of, I am a Republican, and Republicans have twice made me the nominee for this role and elected me to be in this position. So I think that's a great answer to that. But I'm always trying to encourage women to run. I think that there's a lot of benefit, a lot of addition when they're at the table, and please join me, I'm always saying.
What's the core message you would like the audience to hear from you today?
Well, the core function is being that watchdog, and I think that it's important to have somebody who has the skill set to do it. And I think I've shown while I've been in office I've got that skill set, and those other things that I think we as Kentuckians want to see: more transparency, greater emphasis on financial literacy, making sure you're doing the job the way it's supposed to be. But I want to thank the Kentuckians for putting me here. It's been a tremendous privilege. I'm grateful to Kentucky. I'm grateful to God for giving me this opportunity. I've loved it, and I'd like to do it for 4 more years.
Why don't you take just a moment and make a last-minute appeal to the voters?
I'd be happy to. Well, and I think I'm looking at this camera here. It's been a tremendous privilege serving as your Kentucky State Treasurer. Thank you so much for putting me in there, and I'd love to do it for 4 more years. I'd love to continue to be the watchdog on our taxpayer dollars and focus on transparency, focus on financial literacy, and represent you well in Frankfort. Thank you.
This is John Chowning with Allison Ball, Republican candidate for re-election as Kentucky State Treasurer. Allison,
thank you.
God bless you,
thank you.
And be safe out on the campaign trail. We wish you the very best.
Thank you very much.
Thanking our audience for being with us for this segment of Dialogue on Public Issues.